some of the works that are in here, such as the one that's above us, is a piece I made some years back, and is intended to hang from the ceiling in a public space. Of course, it's being stored here on my ceiling right now, looking for a home. This piece on the ceiling is Big Bang. And this is an older work as well that is on the wall and soon will be dismantled. Some of the sculpture here is a lot of fun to work on in this stage. If we look at parts, everything under the shrouds here are screenings and armatures and elements in up to about 9 sculptures. Here's one that has not yet been covered up, but is ready to be taken up to Utica, and it has a whole half of the sculpture is above it. These are parts in a larger sculpture as well. They're all made out of soft screening over armatures, and they are sewn with a copper wire and then painted, sometimes on the inside of them as well as on the outside. So as I'm working, I will also paint, and as I come to the final imagery, I will also paint on the outside of them. So light moves through. You can see color inside the sculptures, and they are very flexible and actually quite light. What's really fun here is I'm just trying to rehab the sculpture. Everything that sits around for a while gets moved around, and things can get loosened or torn, and I have to fix them. And I go around, and it's like a puzzle, because I go around looking all over the sculpture, moving it around, looking for holes, things that shouldn't be moving that are, or things that have a hole, which I will identify, and I say, well, what goes with this? Where does this go to? Well, it's going to be something obvious, but I have to look at all the parts and see what's happening. So it's a little bit like a detective puzzle. The thing is basically back together, but there may be dozens and dozens of places where something has loosened or come apart that I have to get back to where it was. Of course, I have photos and everything to guide me as well, but it's really fun to see how much detective work you can visit on it, like the forensics, so that you can get it back together. And mostly it becomes obvious over time what belongs where. So this is what I'm working on right now. This is called Fire Dance. Fire Dance. This area here is where I keep most of my tools and my hand tools and materials and other kinds of things that one might want to use in the making of sculpture. I have lots of parts. I have lots of bricks and things to stack things on. Lots of wood, and it's what I need as a sculptor, to just have lots of parts that I can grab something and use it in some fashion. The studio is maintained by my longtime assistant, Lindsay Warden, and she is masterful at knowing where everything is and keeping everything in good order, as well as helping me to make these pieces for the show. I'm working on a cloud figure right here, which I consider to be a small version for something larger. Here's a model that I'm starting to work on larger. So here is the form of the idea of a kind of funeral pyre, and here is the core of it at twice its height. So this is going to be, by the time you have flames coming out, you'll have the 5 to 5.5 foot object. It'll be made out of screening. If you notice, I have all kinds of holes drilled here so that where I want to attach things and around which I want, I have access to keeping the stuff in place. So it will be this thing moving off like that. And these are developed in a lot the same way. These are various waves, volcanoes, burning bushes, fires, and this sculpture that I want to make sure. This is an unusual sculpture for me that I have made that some may recognize. Okay, now we're leaving the studio. We're going to close the door, and I'm moving out towards my house. And we've been here quite a long time, since 1971 when we bought the house. And we've always loved this area. It's a wonderful situation into working with sculpture, and just a wonderful place to be. Very, very beautiful in the seasons. I've been working ever since out here, making sculpture, and some of the larger pieces that I make in the studio I have out on the grounds. And I'd like to show a few of them to you because I think you'd be interested in my process of making them and how they came to be what they are. The sculpture in front of you now is called Eroica. If one were going to look at this piece, you would see as you walked around a piece that really changes quite dramatically. It started on the wall in my studio as a wall piece. And if you see the T and some of the more organic serpentine shapes and the spray of metal that's coming out of it, that was the beginning of the piece. I then decided to incorporate a circle in it. So I actually painted a circle on my wall. Then I decided that I really wanted to expand the piece, so I took the piece off the wall, built that circle into the piece, put it up on tall horses, and began to develop the piece moving down and the piece moving up, as well as moving it around. So the piece really came out of the center and extended itself to the ground and into the air. There are architecture elements, rock elements, water elements, cloud elements in it in different parts of the piece that I'm interweaving with each other. As when the piece was now up and being developed down and up, I had it propped in the back, and I eventually came to like the prop and wanting to use that prop as the genesis for a transformed space that you would see as you look through the piece from the other direction. This has more floral grotto qualities with these curved shapes coming up and forming a canopy with the architectural elements below, and your ability to see completely through the piece. It looks very different than the piece that you see as you approach it from the side that I was just describing. And the same thing happens as you move around it, because as I was going up and down, and when I decided to come out this way, I decided to come out that way. So the piece just developed into this kaleidoscope of incidents and spaces that keep transforming as you move through it. You have angles that are more architectural. You have qualities that are like water spilling and water cascading and explosion and elements of leafy forms coming out and through it. So you have the geometric, the hard, the soft, the architectural, the organic, all these things kind of fuse into an ever-changing object. I wanted to show you this piece as well. This is called Hard Landing, and the genesis of this piece was listening to the accounts of the landing of the large plane in the Hudson River that came down. This is also a piece that I made that I wanted to change and expand and contract as one moved around it. The color experience would change dramatically, the sense of the solidity of the piece. We really are anchored here in the shapes on the bottom and the watery-like movement that's taking place, and then this fragmentation as this thing moves up and into the air, almost as the elements are breaking apart. And as you move around it, you'll see that it has very different kind of color experience from one side to the next. It changes from being quite a dense kind of thing to a more open structure. And as you move around it even further, as it moves into the air and off, you can see it as just a bunch of filigree of leaves, parts, and energies that are moving into space. I always try to make the sculpture in the recent years that is more about insides and moving out and in, and the intervals of spaces and the change of densities more than profiles and edges and masses and some of the things you see in some more traditional kinds of sculpture. I almost like the idea that ultimately the sculpture sort of fuses with the environment about it. Where is the inside? Where is the outside? What is the shape? What is the form coming apart? So it assembles and disassembles. This piece is called A Wing and a Prayer, and this also started as a piece, started as something very different than it turned out. Just explaining completely, initially, the piece started up in there, that little vignette way up in the top of this piece, and it was based on an etching by Bernini. And I was living in Rome at the time, and I had seen some of his work in the museums, and I was thrilled to be looking at Bernini's in the city where most of his work existed, and I was taken with this particular small work. And I started to make that in my studio. I then decided to make it two-sided, and then I started to grow. And I started to grow down to a dome in the middle, and then I decided to continue by creating an architecture element and developing under it. So the piece flows up and out. The other thing that happens in this piece is as you move from side to side, the dominance of materials changes. So here we have a piece that has a lot of silver in it, some copper bronzy and some brassy kind of looking things. And by the time you get around to the other side, the piece is transformed into something that is more formal and has more brass in it than it has of the other elements. This piece is called Oratorio, and it's specifically referencing my love of Bernini and things I was seeing in Rome and at St. Peter's and the like. It's a piece that's broken into 4 quadrants, so as you move around it, you'll see 4 distinct different aspects of the sculpture, and we should go towards it where you have this fabric-like material. We have another version in here with a little stick Bernini up there, and we have another more architectural and formal element running through this as well. Looking at another earlier piece, it's called Diva, and it once again is made up of these mixtures of forms that are meant to change and move in focus as you move around them in time. I actually think of this piece having a male and a female side, if you know, in the operatic style of divo and diva. And you have this kind of very assertive, outgoing side, and then you have this rather more embracing and luxurious side with less outward force and more inner feel. And once again, the piece is something you can see completely through. It completely changes. Okay, although everything is fashioned by hand here, of course, this is a welding workshop, and I mostly use a MIG welder, which is an industrial scale welder, which will weld almost anything that I need to do. Mostly work in aluminum, sometimes work in brass, sometimes work in copper. One can weld all those materials and certainly can solder some of them. My other magic tool is this machine, which we found at a local factory. I had an assistant whose name is Kim Carr-Valdez, and her father worked as a head person in one of these large forming factories, and they had access to this machine that they wanted to sell. And it's just been wonderful because it's something that you can get on and you can move up and down in relation to a sculpture. You can move the sculpture up so that you can work on different parts of it. If I didn't have this machine, I'd have to build scaffolds. Scaffolds get in the way and you'd have to constantly rebuild them. So this is really wonderful. I can even take that welder up on this machine and work in the air. So I'm just going to run it up and down so you can see what I'm talking about. Of course, I have this piece here that I'm just going to move up and down in the air, but I can go way, way up. As far as I'm going to go, but it does make a noise at the top, so you know you're getting there. I'm getting very close to this piece. It could go up farther. I'm going to come on down now. Now, just as an aside, I was on this lift a couple years ago, up in the air, about 12 feet, and I fell off it. And I fell through a sculpture, and I ended up in an ICU having broken my skull, my neck, my shoulder, my lungs, 7 ribs, and my scapula. So it's a great machine, but it has its downsides. Okay, is that enough for that?